Hey everyone, today I'm back in Besiege, and I want to try to make another engine. Originally I was going to make a V6 or V8 engine, but I read a comment saying I should try to make a bomb-powered engine, and I wanted to do that instead. So, let's get right into it. So I'm starting off in the sandbox like I normally do, and the first thing I want to focus on is the crankshaft. So I'm just building up a base to put that on right now, and then I put in the two swivel joints there, and these are going to be what the crankshaft rotates on. So I'm doing something similar to my first engine video, and I'm just using a bunch of wood blocks to define the basic structure of the crankshaft. So to make that, I'm going to have 4 notches, and on each of these notches there's going to be a piston attached to it to be able to drive the crankshaft. So I have it pretty much made here, except I accidentally messed up one of the notches, and here for the most part it's done, except I accidentally reversed this notch. It should be facing up and not down. I'll fix that later, I'll show you. But I also realized when I load in, it's very bouncy, and I brace it together and it helps it a little bit, but I also realized it's gonna get worse because I need to expand out the crankshaft a little bit too. On all of these notches, I need 2 swivel joints on the end of them so that the piston can attach to them and be able to drive the crankshaft and be able to rotate independently of it. So I put those all in place, and then I had to go ahead and re-brace it all together. Now, in my first engine video, I had this exact crankshaft design, and you might remember it didn't have any problems with bouncing up and down, but the pistons themselves also had the ability to pull on the crankshaft, which helped support it a little bit. But with the bomb engine, it's just going to be constantly exploding down on the pistons, which is just forcing the engine into the ground. So it needs to be very stable. And here it's pretty good, but it's still bouncing a lot. So what I do is replace a lot of the wood pieces with these ballasts, and the ballasts are great because I can turn down their weight a ton. But I also realized when I put in the ballasts, I got rid of a bunch of bracing pieces, so it was jittering around a lot. When I put back in the bracing pieces, I got this fun glitch where it just randomly was shaking the assembly from side to side. So my solution was to put 2 swivel joints in the middle like I did for all the notches, and I can support that directly to the base of the crankshaft like I did there with those 2 wooden pieces. And now when I load in, you can see it's much more stable. It's not bouncing up and down like it was before. The crankshaft is imbalanced, and that's because I forgot to reverse that notch like I said before. But it was looking pretty good, so I decided to put some legs on it and then throw it on the ground, and now it's looking pretty stable. So after putting in a couple more legs to make it even more stable, now it's stable enough, I think we can start moving on to the pistons. And to do that, the first thing I want to do is just have a lot of wood pieces going around, and this is going to make it very easy for me to base my designs off of. So after getting all those in place, I put 2 hinges on one of the beams like this, and I rotate the swivel joints in the bottom and the hinges on top to face towards each other. And I put some wooden pieces in here temporarily just to help me get those angled perfectly towards each other. But after I get that, I also do it for the other set of hinges like this. And I delete all the wood pieces since they're temporary, and replace them with a couple pistons like this. And I just pin everything in place. Now, I'm not going to use pistons in the final design, at least in this context, but I just wanted to put them in place like this to make it easy for me to see exactly how everything's moving, and just to make sure everything's moving freely. So now I get rid of those pistons since I don't need them, and I replace them with just some wooden blocks. Now, here I actually changed it up a little bit. I replaced the wooden blocks with some smooth surface blocks, but it's the exact same effect. And I was hoping to have this wooden wall here sort of be one of the walls to my cylinder. So as the crankshaft rotates, the piston can rub up and down against this wall. But it ended up being pretty resistive, so what I decided to do was replace the wooden wall with a wall of smooth surface blocks, since it seems to move much more freely against that. So I went ahead, put those all in place, and now you can see how when the crankshaft rotates, it slides right down. It ends up falling though, since nothing's holding it in place. So I put 2 hinges on top of the piston, and I wasn't entirely sure where I was going with this, but I was just sort of messing around and seeing maybe it would help in some way. So I put those hinges in place like I said, and then I put 2 smooth surface blocks on top of them so that they'll rub easier against the smooth surface blocks for the cylinder walls. And then finally I put in the back cylinder wall, similar to how I did the first one. Just a bunch of smooth surface blocks against a bunch of pieces of wood. But my piston kept just sliding out of this. So I decided to get rid of the hinges since I didn't really understand what was happening there, and just put in some smooth surface blocks directly attached to the head of the piston. And now when I give it a test, on the way back, it ends up getting caught underneath some of the smooth surface blocks for the back wall of the cylinder. So it also had occurred to me, there was no reason for this to be perpendicular to the ground. I could just make it parallel with the piston, which would probably improve how it moves. So that's what I ended up doing. I basically just took what I had before and rotated it slightly, and after just making sure to brace everything in place, now when I give it another test, it rotates much more freely, and it gets caught in that bottom corner still, but much less. And to fix that, my first thought was maybe to replace the wooden pieces with ballasts, since the ballasts are much more rounded than the wood pieces. and I was hoping to be able to slip past that bottom piece, but still didn't quite get there. They're still getting caught in the bottom. So my final thing that fixed the problem was just getting rid of the 2 smooth surface blocks on top of the head of the piston. And after doing that, the piston was moving up and down with basically no opposition. So now that I was getting movement from the piston in a way that I liked, it was time to add some bombs in. So the first thing I do is just turn on invincibility, because I know there's like absolutely no way the bomb isn't going to just destroy everything if I don't do that. So I tried putting a bomb on top of the piston here, and it ends up clipping out of the piston and throwing itself away, which was funny, but not what I wanted. So I made this long wooden beam and then dropped a bomb from the top of it, and as it falls down on the piston, you can see it pushes the piston down and rotates the crankshaft. Getting any movement at all here was really encouraging, because I actually thought this might work and not just die right here. Now, it did still have a few problems, but nothing that I couldn't solve. One of them was this, where the piston would get caught in between 2 smooth surface blocks like this and sort of stick itself. So to fix that, I just basically got rid of all the other smooth surface blocks and then expanded one of them out to be really long, so that we just have one long smooth surface instead of a lot of disjointed ones. And this fixed the movement. So finally I went ahead and simplified the cylinder design just by getting rid of some unnecessary wood pieces. And after doing that, it was time to connect up a bunch of the other parts of the crankshaft. So the first one to do is this one, which is the easiest since all I have to do is flip it and then put it in place. And after doing that, you can see movement's the same, just mirrored. Now, the second one I wanted to do was this one, which was just easy to do because it was closest to the first one. I just have to brace it up in place, and after bracing it to the crankshaft, you can see they all rotate. And then finally I have to get this one in, which is the one that I said had a problem before, and this is what that was. I just have to take this little notch and move it up, so instead of being down, it's up. And this should complete the crankshaft and make it balanced again. So just take the top of the piston and brace it to the crankshaft, and now as the bomb falls in it, you can see the crankshaft rotates a little bit. And now if I use my cheats to rotate the crankshaft around, you can see how all the pistons move up and down. So now that this was sort of working, I wanted to work on the bomb distribution system, because these bombs need to explode at just the right time for this to function properly. So what I'm going to do is sort of cheat and just use gravity to help me here, and position the bombs in the air so that they drop on the cylinders at the right time. Now, this isn't going to be my final design, this is just something I'm using temporarily so that I can test the movement, make sure the bombs can rotate the crankshaft fully. So after just staggering the bombs properly, you can see as they fall on each of their cylinders how the crankshaft rotates a little bit, and then usually the next bomb falls down, and basically the cycle keeps repeating. And I also added a gear at the end here, and I braced it directly to the crankshaft so that it's easier to see how the crankshaft is rotating. Alright, and my method of dropping bombs seemed to work, but I'm hoping to have a way to make that a bit more controlled rather than just randomly dropping bombs from the sky. And to do that, I made this big rectangle here, just made of wood, and I pinned it in place. And this is where I'm going to have a bunch of bomb dropping mechanisms based off of. So here I have 2 pistons like this, and if I put 2 pistons on the other side, like this as well, and then hold them all in place with a few wood pieces. Now as I hit a key on my keyboard, I can open up these pistons and close them again. And this should allow me to control when I want to drop a bomb. So if I just put a bomb in here temporarily and have it sit on the pistons, now when I open them up, you can see the bomb falls straight down onto the pistons. So I copy this over since I'm going to need 4 of these, 1 for each of the pistons. And now when I add in the second one, you can see when I open them up, both the bombs drop. And one other thing I want is just a bit more of a controlled system for holding these bombs in place, since I don't want them to ever be able to slip out or fall to the side, since they might fall into another piston or something, and that would throw off the timing. So I get that done, and after that, I decide to copy it over to the other side as well, and that gives me 4 different bomb drops like this. And now that I have that, I need some way to be able to keep feeding bombs into these bomb droppers, since just having one would only let the engine rotate once. So I make this big wooden box to hold bombs in, and the bombs kind of like to stay in the box, but they do have problems where sometimes they'll clip into other bombs, and sometimes they'll just fall in a weird way and explode. And this causes all of the bombs I'm holding to explode. So I decided that's probably not gonna work, because I need a way to hold these bombs in a super controlled manner. If any of them goes off, all of the bombs are going off and I'm losing all the fuel for the engine. So my next method was just having a big ramp like this, and I'm gonna have a bunch of bombs on this ramp, and they're gonna roll down, and they should roll down slow enough that they shouldn't ever explode, but they should be able to get loaded into the dropper and then fall down. Now here I had a problem where 2 bombs were able to get loaded in at the same time. So I used a single wooden block here, and this constricts how many bombs can get through, so that I can only have one go through at a time. Now I did have a problem there, where the pistons ended up clamping on a bomb and causing it to explode. So I need to make sure I'm timing this just right so that the grabber only lets one bomb through and then stops before the second bomb can get through. Now, I didn't really like my method of constricting the bombs there, so I went for something a bit more refined, and it's just taking the railings and just shrinking them in closer together so two bombs aren't able to ride next to each other, and that seemed to work. So I get rid of all the other dropper mechanisms since I realized at this point it would just be easier to finish this one and then copy it over to the other 4. And I'm going in here and I'm making all of the railings much tighter together like I showed before. And after doing that, you can see it pretty much works, except I'm still having that problem where bombs are falling down at the wrong time and then getting crushed by the two pistons, causing them to explode. So I'll address that in a quick second, but I also just wanted to expand out my hopper a little bit so I have more bombs to drop. And after I do that, now I'm going to focus on the problem where I'm not timing it correctly. And to fix that, I'm just going to use a timer block. Now I put down 2 timers here, I'm just going to use one of them for this test, and basically what I'm telling it to do is after 1 second, I want it to open up the gate for about half a second. And when I give it a test here, it instantly explodes. Now, I figured out the problem was that the pistons are opening for way too long, so I lowered it to only about 1/10 of a second. But now I actually have the opposite problem, and the pistons are closing too quickly, which holds the bomb in place. And to fix that, I just decided to double the time to 1/5 of a second, and this ended up just accidentally being the perfect amount of time. So now as the bombs roll in place, the pistons open up for 1/5 of a second, the bomb can fall through, and then they close just in time so that the bomb above it gets stuck. Now I want to focus on what the other timer is. And what I had in mind is, you see how all these bombs are rolling down right now? And I want to wait for all those bombs to roll down before I start opening the pistons in the bottom to let bombs drop. And my reasoning for this is as bombs are rolling down, I don't exactly know where they are, so I could have a situation where a bomb rolls down at just the wrong time and gets crushed by the pistons and causes everything to explode. So by waiting for a few seconds, I end up just removing that possibility entirely. And finally what I did is I just expanded the hopper a little bit more, so now I could fit in more bombs. I could just keep doing this, I guess, infinitely. I could just spiral this all the way up, but at some point there's no reason to do that. I definitely had a long enough run time at this point. And now that I had a bomb dispenser that I was pretty happy with, I wanted to copy it over to all of the other pistons so that each of them could have a bomb dispenser to run off of. So I just copied them in place like that, and I'm getting rid of the timers on the sides of each of the bomb dispensers, and I want to run them in a little bit of a more controlled manner. So I'm moving them all off onto this wood platform I have here, and basically I'm just going to have a long chain of them. So the first one is going to go off every second or so, and then each subsequent sensor is going to fire like maybe 1/4 of a second after the first one, so that they'll go in a looping motion. So I set that up here, and you can see how all the lights turn on, and that's how the bombs get dropped. So I set the first timer to loop every second, so that bombs keep getting dropped, but I had a few problems where everything would just explode. So I adjusted the timings a little bit, but I was still having some problems with that. And I struggled with this for over 45 minutes, but the problem ended up just being that the openings to some of these bomb dispensers were still a little too wide, and some of the bombs were getting pinned in place, which delayed them just enough to get crushed by some of the pistons. So I ended up fixing that, and finally I had the bombs dropping in a controlled manner, and they just kept going. Now there are a few edge cases, such as if the bomb is the final bomb in a row, sometimes it'll get delayed a little bit and fall at the wrong time and get crushed by the pistons. But I was fine with this since if it's the final bomb, I only lost 1 rotation, so I wasn't too mad about that. But I did have one edge case that I wanted to focus on since it was something I actually addressed before, but had forgotten about. And that's when the dispensers first start going, sometimes they'll just randomly explode. And this is what I was talking about before, when the bombs would enter at just the wrong time and get crushed by the pistons. So to fix that, I need to make an initial time delay of about 3 seconds so that the pistons don't try firing until the bombs have settled a little bit. And here's a quick demo of that. You can see how all the bombs first roll into place and then the pistons start going. Now down at the bottom, the engine rotates a little bit, but it's not perfect. And it ended up being that I was dropping bombs a little too quickly, so I had to slow it down a little bit. And after doing that and giving it a little bit of a nudge to start, you can see the engine starts turning, but the output's still very jittery. And now I want to do something that a lot of people suggested for my last engine, and that's making a flywheel. So to do that, I'm getting rid of the wooden base and replacing it with a bunch of ballasts, and I also raised it up into the air. And to make the flywheel, I'm just putting a gear on the output, and then having a lot of wood pieces on the end of it, which gives me a high moment of inertia, so that this thing has a tendency to keep rotating once it starts rotating. And you can see that here, I give it a little bit of a nudge, and it just keeps going for a while. So now I wanted to add in the bombs, and if I tell it to start rotating at just the right time, the bombs are able to sustain this movement. And just for fun, I wanted this engine to do something, so I added a propeller to its output. So the propeller gets spun up by the engine, and then eventually what happens is I can let go of the propeller and it can fly into the air. And you can see that here. So the engine isn't super powerful, but it is good enough to at least give the energy back to the flywheel, and also to spin up the propeller. So now that that's done, I'll give you a few quick shots of the engine running. So guys, thanks for watching. This video was a lot of work to make. A lot of these Besiege videos take me twice as long to make as Polybridge or a Dream Car, but I do like making them, and something like this is just a lot of fun to do. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask below, and until next time.